Cheers.
I don't know if that's the way you start the thing.
Yeah, that's usually how I start. It's usually how I end too. But well, thanks for coming on the Reluctant Sound podcast. I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for the last minute change up and being willing to come on the podcast with short notice.
Absolutely. And Adam will be back for another one. He would love to have been here, but he's got kids too, and they have germs.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Well, better for us that he didn't bring the germs with the little one, right? We're always sick anyway, so you'd think our immune system would be better, but it's never is. And so ROAR Winery, Adam is the 4th generation owner? Or 3rd generation?
Well, actually, for the winery itself, just 2nd.
Oh.
So, but they're a long-term farming family.
I see.
They think their family came over they were Swiss Italian, came over way back when, and were dairy farmers, transferred into vegetables for a while. And Gary he went to school and did agricultural science as well. And, so he then decided at a certain point, grapes made a lot of sense. He was talking to his friend, Gary Pizzoni.
I see.
And of course that's a great thing. They still farm lemons and avocados as well. So
awesome. So
it's pretty amazing, and amazing avocados. They're great farmers.
Yeah.
And so and really ROAR itself as the winery started in 2001, and I actually happened to meet the Pranchionis then because I was assistant winemaker at Siduri where they started.
Oh, yeah.
And that was where their wines were first made because Adam Lee is good friends with Gary, and so he was making the wines to begin with. So it's kind of fun to then make a long circle and come back to meet them again in 2012 and then become their winemaker in 2013. But they started the winery specifically to see what it took to grow better grapes for wine. So he was all very interested in the farming, and he wanted to be able to actually, see what the nuances of what he was doing in the vineyards, how that translated to what was going on in the winery and what needed to be done on that side. So, which is great. I mean, he's always, one thing I think is amazing about that whole family is they never, for any of the accolades they get, they're never willing to rest on their laurels. They're always trying to improve, thinking, not fixing what ain't broke, but just like always looking at things from a different perspective and trying to see what's going on. So it's been great. It's a great family to work with.
2012, so you're past the decade already.
It's crazy. Yeah. So I came and I helped a little bit on some of the 2012s. And then I took on the winemaking in 2013. So yeah, I still feel like the new guy, but I've been making the wines for a little while.
Yeah.
That was back in San Francisco when the facility was in the Dog Patch. So we were there. And now our facility is down in Castroville in Monterey County, so it's closer to the vineyards. Yeah. Both sons have moved down, Nick and Adam, and I grew up in Monterey, so my mom's still down there. It was pretty easy for me to go and be able to check on my mom a little bit more too. But I still think of that as a new facility, but I've now made more wine for them in Monterey than in San Francisco, which is time goes by faster and faster.
Especially when you're having fun. I'm sure it's been fun. I'm sure there's been plenty of stress along the way. And
oh yeah, I mean, but it is a job. But there are a lot of worse jobs.
It could be a lot worse. It's not, Mike Rowe was never on here talking about dirty jobs. He was never talking about the wine industry, right? So we're lucky in that sense. And so I know that you mentioned being at Siduri, but is that kind of where your journey began in the wine industry, or do you have restaurant background, or can you kind of just?
Yeah, no. So I think, I guess the official start probably was my mom and dad used to dip my pacifier in wine.
Awesome.
And I'd ask for more, but I don't remember that part. That's just what my mom says.
You were drunk. No wonder.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I was too drunk for that little kid. But yeah, I always liked wine, but I really never knew anything about wine other than, I like red wine or I like white wine. And I actually majored in ecology, behavior, and evolution, and sort of worked as a field biologist and lab biologist for a little while after college with the U.S. Geological Survey. So we were doing sampling clams throughout the North and South Bay, doing boat trips, which was kind of great and sort of a rakish existence at the time, early in the morning, but kind of crazy. So the hours might be similar to a harvest hours type of thing.
Yeah.
But then when I got married, my wife had a job abroad, and we ended up moving abroad, and I was the house husband it was supposed to be 8 months. It turned into 5 years.
That's awesome.
And it was great. That's where we really got to know Georgian wines, because we were actually living in Russia and then Ukraine.
Wow.
So Moldovan wines, Georgian wines, really enjoyed that. Hungarian wines even at that time. And then also, a lot of semi-sweet wines that weren't necessarily my style. And then a lot of sad excuses for California wines that made it out there at that time. This was a while ago.
Whoever has the funds for global distribution.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so, and then, after 5 years, Laura decided, okay, I'm going to take a little break. We're going to go home, take a rest. Tag, you're it, do something. And I knew somebody who knew somebody who was hiring for this harvest cellar rat position, or harvest intern, I should say, be more respectful for it. But, and that happened to be Adam Lee was the person who was hiring. Wow. I didn't know anything about wine, but it seemed like a kind of a cool thing to do. So I figured for a couple months, and then we'd be abroad again doing something else. So pretty much learned on the job completely. And Adam and Diana were great teachers. It was sort of trial by fire, because they had been doing the wine work all themselves, but they just had their first baby. So Diana was kind of out of commission for that, and they doubled their production. So I was their first non-family employee, and just had to learn or not. So I did. They asked me to stay on through their bottling in January. And then by that time, at that point, I learned how to use the credit card machine and everything, and rang things in while they were gone. And then they asked me to be their assistant winemaker, which was probably a little bit of an accelerated ask, but I mean, really, I'd kind of learned a lot.
Jack of all trades.
Everything from, I learned how to drive a forklift there. I learned what different yeasts were and different oaks, and it was amazing, because they used a lot of different yeasts, a lot of different oaks, and it was and also wines from, Pinot Noir in particular from Santa Barbara to Oregon, and that was a great way to really get an idea of a lot of different regions, a lot of different nuances, the different fruit. And at that time I met the Franchionis. They were making their wines there. They started their winery at that time. And I kind of fell into it, and it just stuck. I mean, I at one point I couldn't believe I'd been making wine I'd been in the wine industry for 5 years. Like, wait a minute, I don't know what I was supposed to be doing, but then I realized it's like, well, I like what I'm doing. This is really cool. It's great, because all of the wineries I've worked for, it's been at a scale where it's hands-on. So I can get my hands dirty. I'm doing the math and the science. I'm doing the art, making the nuanced decisions. But also there's the physical labor, there's the manual labor, and, I'll scrub a tank, and I'll, punch things down and clean the tank, and then taste things and prep the barrels. And I like all of it. So, and we're still at a scale. I mean, ROAR is large for the small scale, but still at 6,000 cases. That's not a lot. So I can still get my hands aren't stained right now, but they will be pretty soon. So, so it's nice to be able to keep your fingers in that type of thing. I did a little stint in between wineries at one point where I was consulting, and it didn't really work for me, because it's like I don't really like going in and saying, okay, this is what you do. And there are people who are great at that. And I don't begrudge that. It's just not my skill set as much. It's like, I'm used to sort of sitting there staring at the grapes for a second. And it's like, why is this looking strange to me? Just trying to figure it out. Or sometimes brute forcing it is like, I've got to stay up all night to restart this, or whatever it is. And so that's at least how I was brought up in the industry. So,
and then so Siduri was the first.
It was absolutely the first. I mean, before we were married, I think I was probably still drinking Francia box wine, and the white. I wasn't really good at. I didn't like the red.
I mean, you have to say it's Chablis.
Yes, the Chablis. Yes, that one. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That was okay, at least at the time. I haven't had that in a while. I should try it again just to see. But
it's always good to be humbled or go back to your roots, right? I always think like the gateway wine is sometimes the most valuable wine, right? And
because if I hadn't liked it at all, then
you might not be in the wine at all.
Well, and it's funny. I love watching people's journey. My wife, even, so she used to only drink Sauvignon Blanc, and that's just greatly expanded over time. Now it's like Vermentinos, or it's like all. I mean, not just whites. I mean, she loves a great cab. She loves Italian wines. I mean, of course, Italian wines are a fantastic other world that I am not knowledgeable about, but I know I like them a lot. But so there's so much more to learn, which is a lifetime pursuit, I guess. So.
Yeah. I don't think any of us will ever be perfect at it. I don't think any of us will ever know everything about it.
I hope not. I mean,
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, there's something new to learn, and I think the people who think they know it all, they're missing out on the fun. So.
Yeah, there's this chart one of my friends was telling me about recently, and I can't remember the name of the chart. I'll try to put it in the show notes or something. I don't know how to do that, but we'll figure it out. And it's like it talks about when you're learning something or when you're learning a new skill, and it's like this big hump, and then it goes down and then it plateaus, and the hump is called like Mount of Stupidity, and then the trough is called like Valley of Misery or something. And it's like this scale about, you learn, and you go like, I know a lot. And then we all have that moment where we just skydive and we're like, I don't know anything. I don't know if this is for me. Like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And then slowly over time, you just kind of like taper off, which is great. It's always,
and then it's mellow, but you still have stuff to learn, which is great. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so let's see, you mentioned a couple names before we started recording that all of the names that you're mentioning are like really important names for this area. The Pisoni family, I think, is like synonymous with the region. And did you cross paths with them at all? Does everybody kind of share at the beginning and help each other out at the beginning, like in other regions?
Yeah, I think it's particularly important. There are some wineries or some winemakers who are tighter to the chest, keep things close.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I think that in Santa Lucia Highlands, at least, I think everybody's interested in trying to elevate the AVA and the wines that are made there. And there are some different styles that are going on there, and of course, ROAR is the best. But I appreciate different people making wines in different styles, even from the same vineyards.
Right.
And so ROAR has a house style, and that's a bold style that both Gary and Rosella love, and they won't make anything that they don't want to drink, and so they're very particular about that. So, which is great, and there are other people who can nuance things a little bit differently than we do, and which I just think is wonderful to be able to taste all those differences. But with the Pisonis, Gary Pisoni and Gary Francione are old friends. They went to school together, and they farm together. So at this point, the next generation is there. Adam's in the farming, Mark's in the farming. Jeff Pisoni is doing winemaking, and Nick is on the winery side. But honestly, Adam and Nick have both done every aspect of the whole business, from ordering supplies to cleaning drains to farming. So they know they're completely integrated into the whole system, which I think is really important to really know your business, and they can also flip flop and do different things if they need to. So it's a nimble, really, it's a family run business completely. Other than me, and I'm just their adopted family. I'm happy to be part of the adopted family. So, but yeah, it's very much family run, and they care about every aspect of it, which is really good. But in that same thought, the Pisonis are kind of like cousin family, even though they're not cousins. So they'll farm each other's ranches, or it's like, okay, we got to pick this, but I'm busy at this place. It's like, okay, I'll come and Mark will do this, or Gary helps Mark and Adam helps, so they're working together in many ways, but they've got their own properties, and then they share a couple properties. And it's fun to see the differences and how things come out in the end. So we buy Pisoni fruit, and they buy some fruit from us as well. So, and then all the shared fruit as well.
That's so cool.
Which is good.
That's cool. I feel like that kind of culture seems like it's disappearing a little bit more and more. And maybe that's just when the larger commercial wineries come in, it maybe culture shocks or something.
Well, and it is hard because I don't begrudge businesses that get big and want to do, absorb things. And I also don't begrudge small wineries that want to cash in, because it's a hard job. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not it's the classic thing. The best way to make a small fortune in the wine industry is to start with a large fortune. But you can make it work. And in many ways, it's more about lifestyle than riches. It's like you can live a rich life without necessarily getting rich in the wine industry, because part of your job is going out to dinner and tasting fine wines and talking to other people and getting in places that way. But I would say that with some of the bigger players that come in, sometimes they're just in it. It's a powerhouse, and that's what's happening. And I think the more successful ones are when they come in and they try to allow the vineyard and or the little winery to keep its integrity as what it is, and they just want to be part of the money of that and make it happen.
Yeah.
But inevitably, sometimes those small wineries operate in not the most like efficient, economical ways, and so there can be an issue and a loss of character and a loss of things that go on with that. And I guess it's, as with any consolidation, that's kind of what can happen. So it's hard. I mean, ROAR doesn't really have any aspirations to do that. We're not trying to grow and sell. I mean, it's really part of their integrated business model at this point. And we're, we could grow. I think we could comfortably grow a little bit more than we are and still be doing it the way we do it. But they're not really interested in jumping to a level where there are lots and lots of layers in between everything. Right. So
yeah, I think that's beautiful. That's part of it though too. Is you want to be in touch with the vineyard, but you also want to be in touch with probably every other aspect of the business, right? Well, right. The further out you get, not necessarily the less control you have, but the less close it is.
Right. Yeah. It's a true expression of their farming and their family and what they're doing. And I mean, Adam Francione would have been here if he could have been today. And so just being out there in the market, talking to the wine buyers, the somms, and even just the end customer. I mean, I personally love pouring at events. Some people don't, and some winemakers don't, but to me, that's like a large amount of what it's all about. It's like the people. It's like, I love the grapes. I love the fruit. I love the farming. I love the soil. I love the process of fermentation. I love the smells. And I love the way that juice becomes wine over a little bit of time, and then how it becomes good wine and then great wine by the time you actually get it out of the bottle on the other side. It's just fascinating. But then that's when it's really awesome to be able to pour it for people and see what their reactions are. Because I can drink it all day, and I do a lot of the time. It's nice to get a little bit of a reflection of what's happening from someone else's perspective, and it's fun, and it also pumps me up too, because the excitement when someone comes in and smells the oak in the cellar that I sometimes don't smell because I'm there all the time. They say, "Oh, it smells so good." It just pumps me up more and more for it. Yeah, even during harvest when you're pretty exhausted.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's what rings true to me is like, I like to share the experience, right? I like to share wines that I love. I like to share like the hospitality essence. I mean, part of the reason for the podcast is the hospitality industry and the wine industry, which usually are tied, but they're not always tied. And I love to do staff trainings. I love to pour at events because it just gives me more opportunity to impact people in a little bit more of like a personal scenario. I sell a case of wine, it goes into the restaurant, it sits on a list. It doesn't do anybody any good, right? It needs sell-through. It needs a champion. It needs somebody to kind of like translate the story from the winery to me to the salesperson or the person on the floor to the customer, and then the customer to their friends, right? I think that's, in my mind, the dream like chain to the consumer.
Absolutely, and I think it is kind of funny because there's, I'm firmly embedded in production, but it's just as with any industry, like production and sales are often at odds with each other. But I mean, I think I learned early on, and probably from Adam Lee a lot, and it certainly translates through to the Franciones too, where it's like, it doesn't matter how much great wine you make if you don't sell it, if you don't present it to people, you can't keep doing it. So I learned it's like, okay, sometimes you have to not sacrifice wine quality or by any measure at all, but you have to say, okay, well, I'm not going to put those barrels right there because we're going to have a little event and we're going to have people here. It's got to be over here. Or I'm not going to do that operation until 11 o'clock tonight because we're going to do this thing beforehand.
We're entertaining somebody.
And it's like, and I know I'm not going to stop the person who is tasting and having a great time and enjoying the wines and really learning about what ROAR is all about, just because I want to top up the wines right now. It's like, I'll top them up tonight and they're still going to be taken care of. But it's not about my convenience. And it could be, but I don't prefer it to be about that. It's more about the experience and making sure it's out there and making sure the wines are taken care of too. So it's like, I don't want to sacrifice that. But
so I was on a tangent, really. I was looking at the map of the vineyards in the region, and I noticed, at least to what I can see, almost all the vineyards are planted to the west of the river.
Yes.
And along the foothills mostly. And is there a reason that is it the cool wind that's coming over the mountain range that you don't nobody plants to the east, or is there?
Well, and some people do plant to the east, but it's kind of different over there.
I see.
And you do, if you get, so you've got the west side is the Santa Lucia Highlands, and you get the Santa Lucia Range, and you go over a couple loops and you're at Big Sur, right? And so you get all the way out to the coast that way. The wind really whips in from the end of the valley up near Marina and then Castroville where the winery is. So the winery is actually cooled down a lot, and we've lost some awnings because it gets so windy there. Wow. And when it comes in, it starts to rip through there, and it gets all the way down the valley, and it really does cool down and shuts down the vines and gives them a chance to rest overnight. For Pinot, that's important. Yeah. I mean, if there was no wind and no coastal influence in Santa Lucia Highlands, it would be hard to grow Pinot because there would be nothing to cool it down. Right. But we have that, and that's also why it works for so many other vegetables, and there's a lot of produce grown in the Salinas Valley. So on that side, you've got those foothills, and it can get pretty high up. So we've got at the more north end, we've got Rosellas, Garys, Sobranis, which are all in that sort of 400 feet of elevation. Not a whole lot of elevation, but a lot of fog influence because it comes in there first. Right. The rest of the region also gets that, but it gets there a little bit later and leaves a little earlier. And then you get down to Sierra Mar, and that's at elevation. You get Sierra Mar, Pizzoni, those are up higher, and so you get this more mountain fruit kind of quality to it. Which is awesome and delicious too. And really, it's just fun to be able to express all of those different vineyards differently. As far as the other side of the valley, you've got the Gabilan Mountains, and that's actually becoming a new AVA, which is good. It's always been there, and there have been some grapes up in that area, but the most known is the Chalon region. So the Chalon AVA, lots of limestone up there, super dry, above the fog a lot of the time. You still get coastal influence, but not nearly as much. So it gets hot up there, but you can still grow Pinot and Chard because the diurnal shift is so great. So it gets cold, it shuts them down. But you can also grow some hotter things. So I've worked with some Mourvedre from up there. Right. I don't think you can really grow Mourvedre in Santa Lucia Highlands. It's just it's too cold for that. You can grow Grenache, I know that, but it's right on the cusp of what you can do with Grenache. Right. And Syrah works quite well because if you like cool climate Syrahs too. So
and there's some Viognier grown, I noticed.
Yep, Viognier, very little. So like for us, I mean, our program, it's like we've got Pinot for us, and then like Chard is like this, and then Syrah is like this. Yeah. Like Viognier is like nothing. You got to cut microbes and stuff to make that happen. But and it's good. It's really wonderful stuff. And I think it's at a point where we can grow Viognier nicely there. Mourvedre though, unless the climate changed quite a bit. Like once it warms up, maybe, who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? It might be the new champion of the region.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. I mean, you hear about Napa like talking a lot about Italian varietals to blend in with Cab just to make it a viable wine. Yeah. Just because it's getting too hot for Cab even. So
I had John Scutney a couple weeks ago from Lang and Reed, and he's growing Cabernet Franc. And Cabernet Franc seems to do pretty well in the Northeast. Yeah, ahead of his time, I guess.
Well, and you've got to be kind of nimble. I mean, farming is not for the faint of heart either, and so you get things like everything from fire to hail to mildew to anything that happens, and you got to be ready for it. But with any type of change in the climate, that could be very much affect what varietals are going to grow out there. And I mean, part of California that I think is interesting is just the process of finding what grows well where. So everybody could say, oh, I want to grow Pinot Noir, and it doesn't necessarily grow everywhere. Like you don't necessarily want it in Central Valley, like in the heat of it. I mean, there might be some nooks on the sides that get in the Sierra foothills or something like that. But and even Paso Robles, which I thought was way too hot for Pinot, there is a little microclimate that you get, north facing up in the hills closer to the ocean, and I've had some quite nice Pinot from there. So I just didn't think it was possible until I knew how they found that. And they found the spot to do it, and that's the great thing. Like Gary Francione really loves Cabernet Sauvignon, but it doesn't grow well in, I mean, maybe some people can do it, but it's not like the greatest place for Cabernet Sauvignon. No offense to anybody who's growing it there. If they are, they're doing a great job. Right. But so Gary grew Pinot. He says, I can just buy some great cabs by people. So we'll grow the Pinot because it's going really well there too. Yeah. And it's fun because it's a different style Pinot from other regions, and that's the whole point of Pinot. Right. It's different in different regions.
Very diverse grape. I mean, it's everywhere that it's grown, it represents itself incredibly differently.
Well, and I think that's one interesting thing because it's still Pinot. It's not like it's, oh, now it tastes like a Syrah or tastes like a Cab. It's like it, but it's funny how you can have Pinot be Pinot and so different from different places and really expressing its terroir. I mean, all grapes will express their terroir, but it seems like Pinot really is the king of that type of thing. And I working with Siduri and also then Rustler Cellars a little bit later on before they became Walt when Hall bought Rustler Cellars.
Oh.
That was another program of Santa Barbara to Oregon.
Right.
And those two programs were fantastic just to see the different regions and see how Pinot could be different. And I loved them. Mm-hmm. It was great fun. Right now, I'm really excited working on like a very regionally specific deep dive. And it's like, this is Santa Lucia Highlands.
Yeah.
And there's still nuances between the different vineyards, right? And seeing what beautiful nuances you can get from those. And I can geek out on that. But then I also love the blended wines. So when we'll make our blends, we'll have every vineyard represented that we're working with. So it's a full AVA representation.
Right.
And that's fun too. So sometimes you get lots of complexity in there that you may miss a little bit of one or the other aspects because it's just one vineyard, but it's complex for itself. And it really represents like Gary's vineyard or Rosello's vineyard. But it's fun to put them together too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's great. I mean, I think, I've heard of ROAR for a long time, and I'm happy to be able to taste these wines today because there is such a small production, and it's not every day that you see the wines, and even when you do see the wines nowadays on lists, like they're still really affordable wines comparatively, right? There's many things in the region and throughout California that are exponentially more expensive.
Yeah, and I think, I try to keep myself out of the money numbers, which is a nice benefit that I've got to just being the winemaker.
Yeah.
But I think that they've always liked to be fair, but they're also good business people. They're not going to... Every year, it costs more money to farm.
Right.
And to grow grapes, like just from the cost of doing business in California, labor costs, taxes, any type of your gasoline, you've got your tractors, you've got everything, and taxes, et cetera. So it's hard to do. I mean, it's all handpicked. It's all very hands on, and that's the way it is. But so prices have increased over the last 20 years, of course, and it's hard because of course you want to just like, oh yeah, I'm going to keep the same price forever. But at some point you're just losing money and people don't want the prices to go up on the customer side.
Right.
But they are fair prices, I think. But I guess, 30 years ago, if you had asked me, would you pay this much for a bottle of wine? I was like, what, are you kidding me? That's crazy.
Yeah, me too. I mean, one of my first wines was $10, and I go like, that's a lot of money. I don't know. What if I don't like it?
Yeah, right.
That
exactly.
was the first thought. And now we're somewhat irresponsible with wine funds. So
yeah. Well, I mean, it's work.
Right. Yeah. I'm studying.
Back up. I'm a pro.
Yeah. Great. And so over the last decade plus at ROAR, I mean, how much have you seen the wine world change in that region? Have you seen like a major shift in the businesses that are coming down? Have you noticed somewhat of a climate shift? I mean, I'm sure a decade gives you enough. Well, and then with Siduri also, you have more than a decade of time in the region. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I mean, I think for a little while we were worried, and I think we will always be worried about drought more than anything. So, but the last few years, it's easy to start to forget about that because going into the 2023 vintage, the early part of 23 and the end of 22, it would just pour down buckets. And honestly, it's like, as long as it's not doing it during flowering or right at harvest, I say rain all you want. Just bring the rain. It's like, it's great. The vines love it. The land loves it, everything. And it's amazing to see, like growing up, I just always, that whole Salinas Valley, all the hills, if it rained, it would rain and then it would get dry and the hills were always brown.
Right.
It now it looks like Ireland.
Yeah.
Because it's also been raining like once a week. So it's like just before the grass wants to get brown, it gets a little more water. It's like, okay, I'm good for that. And that kind of soaking is great because it just keeps it going. And it's not that we're not going to be in a drought again, but we were really dry for a little while and also quite hot. The last couple of years have been really cool. And, the thing is we talk about climate change, but it is more change than warming because you never know. It just makes it more volatile, and so it's hard to know. It seems like things are a little bit less consistent than they were. It's like it's a cold year. It's like, oh, it's a warm year. It's like oh, we lost some more veg from a hailstorm. It's like, a hailstorm, really? It's like, what? Yeah. So I think as far as that goes, I think the biggest thing that I've noticed in the industry in general is just some of that consolidation that you were talking about earlier. And that's, a natural thing to have happen. But I also think it can be a little bit sad because some places where it's like, oh gosh, that changes the landscape of who's who. And then you also are not necessarily in that collaborative mode anymore, right. Like with different wineries or winemakers and different growers saying, it's like, oh, what did you hear? It's like suddenly you've got an entity that's not really in that type of mentality.
And those many years of friendship are now.
Yeah, it's a little bit skewed differently and stuff. So that I think is something interesting. And honestly, I think more recently, be it pandemic or new demographics, and as far as in the greater industry, I think there's been a lot of change in the market, which, we're fortunate that, we've got a good direct to consumer situation. People like the wines. We keep a consistent, we're not trying to chase scores. We're just kind of making the wines the way we like to make them. And right. I think that's kept a lot of people on board, but they're between, wine lists not being quite as deep as they once were because they're like, they don't want to get stuck with a lot of inventory if there's another pandemic, or just people feeling their pocketbooks. Although, people still seem to want to buy good wine for now. I mean, you hear about the new demographics, the new generations coming up not drinking wine. And it's hard to say.
Or not drinking at all.
Or not, exactly, not drinking at all. And that's, which is funny. I mean, I was thinking about that. It's like, gosh, what would I have with dinner? Is it just water? It's like, what did I have when I was a kid? It's like, I guess I had like milk, but I mean, it's a strange, you get
iced tea.
Yeah, exactly. I guess you get conditioned to what you're used to, but honestly, for me, there's nothing really that tastes like wine. And I like that. I mean, I like not sweet, like juice is juice, but wine, there's something, it's not even about the alcohol itself. Although alcohol has its own mouthfeel and viscosity. Right. If there was no buzz effect to it, that would be fine with me. Right. I just like the flavors and the way those flavors come together and how they compare with foods and do different things. So it's interesting to watch and wonder what's going to happen with people's drinking habits in that way. I mean, I'm not petrified about it and worried. It's good to keep it in mind. But I mean, I think there are people who are drinking wine and enjoying it, and maybe that generation doesn't, and then their kids will be all over it. So I guess wine's been around, not to be to rest on the laurels of wine, but it's been around for thousands of years. So I think we'll probably still have some in a little while.
Yeah. Well, I think too, maybe there'll be, I've said this in a couple of podcasts also, is like, I think there'll be somewhat of like a backswing effect. And I think what we're in right now is a backswing effect of like, and every episode I'm bashing Truly and White Claw, so I'm probably going to get a cease and desist at some point. But I think at one point, people were under the guise of drinking healthy was like a low calorie beverage, right? And and they were drinking these things, and it was kind of misguided that it was a healthy product when it's not really. You have no idea what it's made from. You have no idea where it's made. You don't know case production. You don't know yield or you don't know anything, right? Yeah. And wine is so much more transparent than that already. Yeah. And I think that's also kind of the boon of natural wine is that, like we discussed earlier, natural wine the term can sometimes be a little misleading, but natural wine I think is also just, it's a nice way for people that are more concerned about what they're putting in their body to start paying attention to what they're drinking. Yeah. And it's my hope that that's a gateway, just like inexpensive wine was the gateway for us in our youth. I'm hoping that this will be the gateway for the new consumers. Right.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, they think natural, they taste it, and then, and hopefully they come to the greatest natural wines, and right. Or if they don't, then hopefully they come to, oh, well, this wine tastes pretty good. Yeah. But and people's tastes change and they shift, and it's, being in doing some traveling in the center of the country, in Missouri, for instance, and my father-in-law had lived there for a little bit before he passed away, and it was interesting because at one point we're thinking, oh, should we move out to Missouri, be able to see him more? Maybe I start a winery here or something like that. But I realized it's like, but the style of wine that I like to drink and make, there is a good wine market in St. Louis in particular, Kansas City. There's some good people buying great wine, and everyone, good people for sure.
Right.
But I realized that at least where he was living, the local tastes ran to the sweet. They wanted sweet wines, which wasn't something I was comfortable with making.
Yeah.
And that's not why we didn't move, but I mean, it was one of the things that's like, I don't know if I could make the wines, because you want your neighbors to be able to buy it. You don't want to have to just make it and only St. Louis will buy it or ship it to California.
Yeah.
You want the people to come to your opening event or whatever it is and enjoy it, rather than just, tasting it and going, oh, it gets sour. It's like, it's not sour really. I promise. But yeah. So it's interesting. So different tastes. And that's okay. I'm not trying to tell anybody what they should drink. As long as they like it, that's okay. But.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I spent a decade in Texas, and I remember I was working at one point for Glazers and then Southern Glazers after the merger. And one of the big brands that took off for us was Skyfall from Washington, part of the Deutsch portfolio. And they did a Riesling bottling, and it was an exclusive Texas market bottling, right? And it was like 5,000 case production. And we just like crushed that in the market, It was sweet wines, it was rosé, it was just things that you want to drink when it's blistering hot outside, right? Just can't blame them, unless it was steak, and then it was, Napa Cabs. So it's interesting that you mentioned, kind of the what we often think of is industry professionals, and then we often think of, I think, more me than you probably, I think of the consumer palate, and I think of the consumer palate of West Coast consumers versus kind of Central United States or East Coast consumers. So,
well, and it's important to know the palate of your audience, and certainly our audience is, really Central Coast for us. I mean, we get around a little bit and we distribute to other states, but it's pretty small production. So, but even in the South, you've got sweet tea. Like I like iced tea, but I don't really like it sweetened.
Yeah.
But when it's blistering hot, you kind of need that sugar. It's like somehow it helps. And so it's important to remember that. And I think we're all better served if we think about that when we're making wine or serving wine to people. But I do try to, whenever I'm pouring for someone, I always just say, if just. You tell me what you think, but you don't have to like it. It's if it's not your taste, then that's okay.
Right.
We only make so much wine, so But I do like to bring people along for a ride if they have questions.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people ask questions that are funny though. I'm always for people asking questions, but when people ask, sometimes it's like, what's the pH of the wine? It's like, why do you care? Why do you do? Unless you've got some digestive issue where you can't drink acid, which is possible, but most people aren't doing that. They're just. It's a little knowledge, a little information. It's like, if you like it, then it shouldn't matter. Even alcohol. It's like alcohol. We get into the high 14s, and some people want it to think, oh, that's high. It's like, oh, well, there's higher stuff out there. But it's really about balance. And if I've had, 15 plus alcohol. I've had 16% alcohol wines that tasted perfectly imbalanced. I've had 13.8% or 12% alcohol wines that tasted good too. It's just, I don't think ROAR would taste good at that level, because I think actually picking that early would not bring good fruit flavors to what we make. So
you have like a really lush fruit characteristic in the wines, but you also have that really nice acidity to balance it.
And I think that's one of the keys to Santa Lucia Highlands, is it has some natural acidity. So a lot of times we're waiting. Sometimes we have to pick at higher sugars just so the acid isn't like completely searing. And that's kind of a great position to be in, because we don't have to do as much to like mitigate that, but it's nice to have acid profiles that can give support to that lush fruit. And it's fun, but then sometimes if people really are adamant that they want to make a 12% alcohol wine, it's hard to do that and get great flavors from the fruit in Santa Lucia Highlands. You can get the acid, but you'll have a lot of acid at that level. We were just messing around with looking at sparkling numbers, and we picked some sparkling for people before, and it's interesting to see, like, you don't want it to be over a certain sugar because it gets crazy, and I've never made sparkling before, so it was a really interesting experience. But you also want the acid to be pretty high.
Right.
But we were realizing in some of our vineyards, like the acid, like by the time the sugar was at 20 bricks, the acid was still like way too high to get it to even work for sparkling. So like the balance is really hard to do. And we found a nook that worked for it. But it's just interesting. Different reasons to pick things. But if you do that and you don't have the fruit development, then it's just acid.
Yeah. Then the base product is
there's nothing there. So,
do you feel like when you were picking those grapes for the sparkling, it was elevation played a major factor, or maybe?
That's something interesting. So we did pick some fruit from Rosella's vineyard that we were going to try out, but that really, we couldn't, the acid was already dropping and the sugar was getting higher. And we really kind of came up with the idea pretty late in the game, and we're not making it, but it was something to experiment with.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of too late for that vineyard. We would have had to start it a lot earlier. And it might have been a good source for it. It might have been. But then we, going up to Sierra Mar at elevation, it did kind of help to get there. But I'm not sure I ever got enough fruit ripeness to match what would be there. Like there was, and especially in a year like this, it was kind of cool.
Right.
It was, you didn't get a lot of the phenological ripeness, even if the numbers were going in a certain way. And that's one thing, what we do, that's where it's the art and the science. Well, when we're going to make picking decisions, we look at all the numbers and we consider all the numbers. I mean, I'm not going to pick it if the acid's going to be so high that it's not going to ferment.
Right.
And likewise, I'm really not wanting, I could do things about it if it's got too much sugar, but I'm not really trying to make super high octane things. This is high enough right here, but it's there's the flavor too. So it's like at some point it's like, well, the sugar's getting high, but it's just the flavor is just not there, and we're not going to have the product we want if we don't have the flavor. So sometimes we wait for that, or sometimes it surprises us. It's like, wow, the sugars aren't that high, and it tastes great, so we'll pick it. So it's kind of a combination of things, which is great. It keeps us on our toes.
I love the unflinching commitment to quality. Right?
Yeah,
it's not about tailoring it to be a certain way. It's about kind of like representing it to the best of its ability.
Right, and there's terroir, which we've talked about already, but tempoir, if you will. That's kind of made up, but it's just the sense of like vintage variation.
Sure.
That's a huge aspect to the wines, and it's not Coca-Cola, so as much as I've had a lot of Coca-Cola in my time, but it's not cookie cutter. You can't make the same exact thing every year, but you can express the nuance of the vineyard, and that changes a little bit. But still, we're always looking to make sure that whatever blend we're coming up with is it tastes like Rosella's. But it's not fitting a square peg into a round hole, because it is Rosella's, obviously. But it's just making sure that the expression's there. Like sometimes it's like, well, there's not enough floral quality to these three blends, but this one has that. It just and it could be almost all the same barrels. One barrel here and there can make a huge difference. And so we beat our head against the wall sometimes, or our palates against the wall, just tasting and nuancing. And sometimes it's take out this barrel that we liked and it's great, or sometimes it's putting that one barrel that was a little bit funky, not in a flawed way, but just like what's going on there, and that just makes the blend really pop. And it's funny, it's counterintuitive sometimes, but in the end we're trying to acknowledge that, okay, this is what things are like.
Right. And
within that, Gary's will be the most Gary's like it can be, and Rosella's will be the most Rosella's like, and Sierra Mar will be the most Sierra Mar like. And then of course the blend. We've got our Santa Lucia Highland blend, which is a great sort of snapshot, or really overview, I should say, not even a snapshot, but an overview of the region for that year. And as much as that can swing things a lot with different climates during different seasons of drier, wetter years and things, but it still tastes like Santa Lucia Highlands, and it still tastes like Pinot Noir. Those are important things.
Still has its identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think, we talked about that earlier, is like Pinot Noir, and it's particular identity. And it's like, I had a blind tasting group, and one of my friends, we said specifically, it has to be something testable. It has to be on the advanced grid. That's the only wines that you can bring. This guy brought something, and I was just torn, right? And I'm like, I can't decide. This is 100%. I know that this is Pinot Noir, but I'm stuck between New World and Old World. I can't figure it out. And I eventually went with New St. George was my call, right? It just had this more earthiness, less poppy fruit kind of vibe. And it was Patagonian Pinot Noir. And I was like, well, it's not testable, but I was at least able to identify it. There was no question in my mind that it was Pinot Noir. Yeah. And I think that was one of the cool things about it was it still had its identity. Even a place where I'd never had a wine from there before, I was still able to identify that this is Pinot Noir, right? Because of its true characteristics.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's fun. I mean, I love doing those. I mean, I'm not great at the blind tastings, but it's always good practice. Yeah. And especially in friendly environments where it's like you try, you mess up, and that's okay. But you learn something. And I mean, I think one of my favorite pulls on it was like a brown bag lunch during bottling. So we were bottling, and then we take lunch and have people brought in bags, and and I actually guessed Trousseau. Yeah. But it was because the week before I had some Trousseau, so it was fresh on my palate. Right. It's like, that peppery thing it's so good. Yeah. But so it was fresh, and I could actually get it. And that's a pretty overt thing too in some ways. I mean, not a lot of people know it necessarily, but having just tasted it recently, it was kind of good. I think one time I picked Gruner Veltliner too, which was a happy one for me.
That's great. Yeah.
Other than that, I sometimes I'll miss my own wine sometimes, and
that's fun.
Still fun.
Yeah, it's still fun. And earlier you were mentioning kind of barrel selection, or you were mentioning blending the barrels together. What's the oak program on these wines? And
so it's funny. So Pinot Noir, we're pretty heavy on oak in that it works well for our style, and I think that's it is important to qualify for our style because the bigness of the fruit works well with oak. I think if we picked it a lot less ripe, I'd probably want to use a little less oak because also you end up you've got your tannin and acids that kind of they complement each other, but they can also conflict at a certain point and can get bad. So for us, we do about 65% new oak on our Pinots, and then on our Chards we actually have it down a little bit. We do more 30% there. So and that swings. So that's what we buy for the vineyard for the vintage. And then depending on the blend, sometimes we come up with a Chard blend. It's only 25%. Yeah. Or sometimes it's 40%. And likewise with the Pinots, it can swing. It swings down to 50 something percent, or even gets up to 70%. It just depends on how it tastes at that point. And we're not trying to bump it up. We're kind of happy in that certain zone. Yeah. It seems to work for what we've got. But
it's incredibly well integrated. I mean, I feel like sometimes you can get Pinot Noir and if the oak's too dominant, it loses its identity. But I think it's nice to mention, like you did, you're picking a riper style. And so when you're picking at that riper style, it maybe has more strength that it can support more oak.
Yeah, and I think in some ways the structure of the oak also helps to support the fruit in that riper style. And I think it's funny too, because I think Pinot, and I learned this back at Siduri too, the Pinot can hold a lot of oak, like 50% more. It's really not that big a problem if it's the right, you're picking at the right times to work that. But when I first started in the wine industry, I thought, it's like, Pinot can take oak. It's like Syrah, that's a big one. That should be able to take a lot of oak. And some people may be able to do it, but I just can't get oak into my Syrahs well. I do a little bit if I've got, I might do 30%. But if I have two barrels, I'm probably not going to use any new oak because I have 50% to me on Syrah. It just doesn't work. And I think at that point it's because you've got so much natural tannin to it that it just conflicts and it doesn't. And there's not as much acid to brighten it. It's depending on the vintage on the Syrahs. A lot of times Syrah's pH can get a little bit higher. Right. But I learned early on that it's like 25% or 20%. Or 0%, that sounds pretty good. 30% maybe, depending on the year. It can work, but getting too much higher doesn't really work. So sometimes you think big wine, more oak, and that doesn't really necessarily play out completely well. Yeah. And in Chardonnay can handle a lot more oak than we put on there. But again, it's kind of like what you said. It's like for us, we really do love. There's a minerality to the region that shows through in the Chards and the Pinots, I think, as well. But also, you know, a little bit of oak support is great. But also, we've got such pretty fruit that you want to show that. You know? We don't want to go stainless steel. That's not going to be our style at all. Yeah. And some people do a great job with that, and I love those wines too. I've got a broad palate for Chard. I mean, I'll take, you know, the big butterball Chards. I'll take the steely ones, and but you know, I mean, I guess I also like a lot of other white wines that fill those bills a lot too. But yeah, so oak is an interesting one. I think it actually isn't taxed when we buy it, because they've ruled that it is an integral part of the wine. So the taxation on it comes from selling the bottle of wine. Wow. So we don't have to pay sales tax on a barrel of wine. Wow. Because we're passing it through into the bottle, and it's part of the wine. And that's what because it's been around, that's the way they've done it for so long. I wonder if you could make a case for that for concrete. It's like, but look, I'm using concrete instead. It's like, but I don't think that. Or stainless steel or whatever. Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, that's just a vessel. Oak is actually getting in. Right. Yeah, it's part of it. Oak's not quite terroir, so you know, you could probably. It's not the hill I would want to die on, but it would be an interesting hill to fight on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's fun. And we have one concrete tank that it's not an egg, so you've got the egg-shaped ones, which they're really cool. Yeah. And for the eggs, they've got this natural convection, and that's not something that I wanted for our wines, but I wanted the material, not because you're soaking out concrete, but it seems to have a different fruit expression. Part of it is there's the thermal dynamics where it's like it stays cold when it's cold and it stays hot when it's hot, and so it takes a long time for it to warm up, and then it's hard to cool it back down. Kind of keeps things very stable. And we've got one, and we've liked the results, but the problem is that to get a good sized fermenter that we can also use for aging, our lot sizes are pretty small. I mean, even when we say 6,000 cases, you know, we're making those in 5-ton lots, so you know, maybe we do 100 tons. We've got 20 tanks, we've got 5 tons in each of them. Right. But that only really produces 9 to 10 barrels of free run, which is, you know, our kind of cream of the crop before pressing anything. Right. And our pressed wine can be really good too, but you know, knowing that, what we'd want to age into concrete would be some of that free run. Right. And it's hard for us to get that tank, in order to make it large enough to be a good fermentation size. It's about 2.5, 3 tons. To fill it up, and you really do have to fill it up, you'd need to have 12 barrels. So when we've done it, we've had to blend 2 different lots from a vineyard and say, okay, well, or 4 at one point. We did a Sierra Mar where it was 4 different lots. We took some of the free run of each of those and put it together to make that blend. And we'd have that, and then fill up a few barrels also, so we could see what the aging was like differently. Trying to get an experiment out of it. Yeah. But it's fun. I mean, it's just another different type of thing. Another tool for the tool belt. Yeah, exactly. And we don't tend a nice or spice in the cabinet or whatever you will. Yeah. I mean, I could imagine getting another concrete tank, but it's not like we're replacing all of our stainless steel tanks. They're great. They clean up really well. They're great for fermentation, and we don't really age in them. You know, we will bottle from them. We don't really age in those. We age in oak or neutral oak. Well, for Pinot, we use a lot of once used oak as well. For Chards, though, we've got some 8-year-old barrels that we are still using for another little program I'm doing. I think I just saw a 19-year-old barrel that I bought used when I first started, and it's been around for 10 more years. So as long as you backyard the whole time. No, exactly. No, if you keep them clean, you keep them gassed. We used to use sulfur dioxide gas, which pretty much means either burning a wick in there or having a can of poisonous gas hanging around. But we now have an ozone generator that we use for ozonating water to help sanitize tanks and things like that. But it'll also do ozone gas. Wow. You could put that into a used barrel, and you know, the greatest thing is it just turns into oxygen. Yeah. It breaks down to oxygen, but in the moment that it's in there, you know, you're putting it in for a minute, literally a minute, sometimes 2 minutes. It gets into the pores, kills off or knocks back any bacterial growth that'll happen. Because if you don't do something, bacteria will grow. Right. And then you bung it up and do that every month or so, and it just keeps but the greatest thing about the ozone gas is when you go to smell it to assess the barrel, it just smells like a barrel. Right. As opposed to with sulfur dioxide gas, it's like you got to either rinse it out, blow it out, and there's nothing wrong with it too. I mean, it works. Right. It definitely works. But you know, I'm very happy to not have a can of poisonous gas hanging around.
Is the ozone thing new? I don't think I've ever heard about that. I haven't spent a lot of time researching how you store a barrel though, so I guess that could be on me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the ozone gas was new for us because we did use sulfur dioxide, but we've used ozonated water for a while for rinsing things down. It's kind of an sanitization type of thing. But being able to use it as gas is pretty good. Now you don't really want to use it a lot. I mean, you don't, just as with sulfur dioxide gas, you don't want to breathe a whole bunch of it.
Right.
So you do it. You've got a wand that goes into the barrel,
Yeah.
and it sort of sprays it out this way and kind of fills it up, and then you turn it off and move it on. But it was good. It's a really neat thing to be able to make happen. Just to have clean, fresh barrels without having to go through that extra rinse to assess them,
right.
And knowing that and we can generate it ourselves, and it's just really, I think it's kind of like a lightning machine in there that causes the ozone because it's
cool.
And then we just pump it in there and go for it, or it infuses it in water when we're rinsing something down.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. I'm gonna have to do more research on that.
Yeah, I mean there are cool tools. I mean, really, when it gets down to it, winemaking is at its heart not really different than it would have been in Rome or anywhere. I mean, should we have different vessels? We have different things. There's different things that you can use for cleaning. But sulfur has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
There are just some new tools that we've got, and I like knowing about the tools, but we tend to do it pretty naturally. I mean, we're punching down the wines. We're aging them in oak. We do have a forklift, so that's nice. It's an electric forklift, so that's good. But yeah, we don't have like fumes in the winery. But we do move the barrels around, so we don't have to. It's as luxurious as it would be to have them stacked up in the pyramids. Yeah. That's kind of nice, but also you can't pick them up at that point. Yeah. That one's leaking. You got to dig all the way down.
Tear them all apart.
Yeah, exactly. Which is cool too. I mean, there's something really zen about that too. Yeah. But when it gets down to the rest of it, though, it's like, okay, well, we've got one cool thing is we've got glycol chillers on the tank, so we can keep the temperature down. But most of the time, we kind of let them go, and I just am trying to keep them from killing themselves off. Yeah. And with a 5-ton tank, the heat can get up to 90 degrees without really blinking an eye. So you don't want it to get too much hotter than that because it will hurt itself. Yeah. But yeah, those little things and different ways of sorting. And we don't tend to use a lot of whole cluster. A lot of people do. I use some in Syrah. And I like whole cluster. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's great when people do it. And for our program, we haven't seemed to integrate it quite as well, unless it's really like 2013 was a great year for whole cluster. The stems were really ripe, lignified. Yeah. Like you chew on them, they taste kind of woody and nutty, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. So we did a bunch of whole cluster then. But then in 2014, I would have tried some more, but it was a really hot, fast year. I was worried that the fruit itself wouldn't have even had a chance to get phenologically ripe. And the stems certainly not. So I just didn't do any stems that year. And we've dabbled with a couple small experiments over time sometimes, but and I'm glad I didn't do it there because I think that those 14s have turned out to be quite good, but it took a long time for that tannin to settle
down. Yeah. Well, it's our time. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to the audience? Anything you'd like to say to wrap it up?
First of all, thank you for the Riesling. I don't make any, so it's nice to actually have some sort of another wine on the palate. But I would say for me, the best pairing for any wine is good people. So share the wines with people. It's a community type of thing. That's my end note.
I love it. All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.